First of all, we have Tom Griffith he's the AVP of Leadership and Organization for Frontier Communication. Let's show the love to Mr. Tom. And what he really wants to be known as someone who creates the capacity in leaders to bring out the best in others. That's what he really wants to be known for. Next we have Rob Ollander, and he is Head of Talent Planning and Performance for Gap. Show the love, Mr. Rob. And then we have David Theis. He's the VP of Organizational Effectiveness and Talent Management for Fannie Mae, and we mean the money, not the chocolate. So let's show the love to Mr. All right, so I want them to start out telling their story, and I'm going to start with Tom first, and then we'll move over to David. And I want them to tell their experience with performance management, tell a little bit about their company so we have some context, and then tell a little bit about their experience with performance management to date. And I'm going to start over here. Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you. My story around performance management goes back to my work at Sears Holdings, where, like many, we were frustrated with the annual appraisal, mid-year appraisal process, and not really getting a lift for it. And within the last few years, Sears has gone away from the traditional performance appraisal process. As a matter of fact, we rebranded it, we renamed it. Instead of calling it performance management, we actually called it performance enablement, because the leader's job, the organization job, is to enable the performance of others, either by providing tools, resources, feedback, coaching, enabling people, removing barriers, those sorts of things. So instead of the endless hours that leaders spent writing performance reviews and people doing self-assessments, we went to a quarterly system. It was called quarterly check-ins, and we reversed the time element of that. So on the old system, you spend more time preparing to have that annual review and less time actually having the review. With this new performance enablement process that was dialogue-based, you spend less time preparing and more time talking throughout the course of the year. So we found that dialogue and dialogue practices were especially important to the success of this particular process. There were several components to it. So instead of the traditional evaluation process, people had set goals. At the beginning of the year, they set their annual priorities. Then on a quarterly basis, they set their objectives and key results. So that was a technique, OKRs, that was originally pioneered by Andy Grove at Intel and then perfected upon through Google, and we learned from them. So the extent to which people have control over their work lives through the identification and management of key goals was very important. Another big part of this new performance enablement platform, this was all all automatic, by the way, was feedback. The culture that we had at Sears was called a culture of accountability and integrity. One thing we learned throughout their process was that feedback drives accountability, and accountable people continuously seek feedback. So there were so many benefits to this idea of feedback, and you could provide feedback. Anybody could provide feedback to anybody else on our cultural beliefs, which is akin to values, the results that people had achieved, or the demonstration of new leadership competencies that were part of our capabilities model. And then in the check-in process. So that's a little bit about it. So I think I'll just pass it on just so everybody can get started.
Sure, and we'll be circling back. By the way, and as we're listening, any questions that you have, make sure, because we do want to do a robust Q&A at the end too. Okay.
You guys seem so far away. Come closer. Come on down. We don't bite. So how many of you, by show of hands, are being asked by your organizations to innovate performance management? Wow, just a few of you. So the rest of you can leave because this is going to be irrelevant to you. I'm going to try to do in 4 minutes what I normally take an hour to do, which is to explain the innovations that we made at Gap. So for those of you who are not familiar with my company, it's Gap brand, it's Banana Republic, it's Old Navy, it's Intermix, which is a women's contemporary business, and it's Athleta, which is a women's athletic wear business. By show of hands, how many of you are not wearing my product? Come on, you can be honest. Next time I speak, I expect every one of you to be wearing something from my companies. 4 years ago, we decided to blow up performance management. Very similar to Tom's story at Sears, our employees hated it. It didn't drive performance. It really was only used to supposedly take the bias out of a manager's assessment of performance in order to allocate reward. No one liked it, but we did it. We had to. And the key here for me is that it didn't drive performance. So our CEO actually said, this takes too long. Can you make it simpler? And we went back to him and said, no, we can make it simpler and we can make it more effective. There's all sorts of research out there that shows that traditional performance management is actually a disengager and doesn't drive performance. So in a nutshell, here's what we did. We eliminated reviews. There is nothing written in our performance management process unless a manager determines that someone needs to be on corrective action. That's highly documented. It's supported by HR. It's supported by ER and sometimes legal. That makes our cases defendable when we're brought to court for a termination. But other than that, nothing is written. A manager can write something down if they want. An employee can write something down if they want, but the company requires no documentation. There are no ratings. Ooh, no ratings. How do you allocate reward without ratings? We figured out how to do it. And instead, similar to what happened at Sears, we wanted to encourage frequent, informal discussions of performance, because we know that when you talk about performance, you can actually drive performance. And waiting to the end of the year to this arbitrary line in the sand does nothing to drive performance. It just doesn't. And there's a lot of threat created around that conversation that happens at the end of the year that prevents employees from even hearing the performance feedback. All they want to know is, did I get the A or the B? And if I got the C, I'm pissed about it. And in our company, 55% of our employees were pissed because 55% got the C in our forced distribution curve. Why do you want to demotivate your employees in that way? So those were sort of the structural changes that we made. But really, the change that we made was to drive a learning culture. So we adopted Dr. Carol Dweck's growth mindset concept. Anyone who's not familiar with that concept? Growth mindset? All got that one? If you're a parent, if you're a parent, you should absolutely read her book and apply those, what she believes to the raising of your own children. But it actually works in business as well. A growth mindset is someone who believes that it's about mastery. It's about becoming better at something. It's not about looking good. It's about getting better. And so that became our talent management philosophy, and we built the performance management process on top of that. And we also created a performance standard to describe what we expected for every employee, because when you get rid of ratings, you need to replace it with something else. So that's in a nutshell what we did. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's an ecosystem. So just talking about one component doesn't tell the whole story. You have to see the whole thing in order to make it work. We did this we rolled it out in 2014 to 10,000 headquarters employees globally. Nobody died, everybody got paid at the end of the year. And last year we rolled it out to the athletic division, to the stores. So now we're starting to work on our stores. And we've seen nothing but positive changes in HR, every HR metric that we track in our stores. So we're really excited about it because we've taken the angst and the awful calibration and the administration out of the process, and we've actually started to drive performance, which is really what performance management is all about. That's our story.
Before David says his piece, how many of you are either considering or already have taken the numbers or grading out of your performance management? Considering doing it or have already? Okay, so that's being seen as a trend. Okay, excellent.
We have a question. Hold
Oh,
on.
sure.
Rob, just curious, how do you know it's being successful? Like, are you measuring something to determine that success?
Well, so let me start by saying we want to get out of the business of being the HR police. So a lot of the traditional ways in which HR sort of drives the performance management process is gone. We want managers fully accountable for hiring, retaining, developing, and assessing their employees, and we'll take nothing short of that. But the first year, and the first year only, we put in a couple ways to measure our success. And the most obvious way was that we put in a survey to all employees once a quarter to say, did you have at least one conversation a month? Because we expected 12 conversations a year. Did you have at least one? 90% said yes in the first year, which we thought was amazing. Like, really? 90%. And then we asked 3 quality questions. Are these conversations driving your performance? 4.2 on a scale of 5. And even if they weren't actually driving anyone's performance, the fact that the employee's perception was that it was driving the performance was an engager. Is your manager helping you to learn from your successes and your failures? That's a growth mindset concept. 4.1. Wow. And then the most important one for me was, is the way in which your manager giving you the feedback make you want to get more or less So this was about not creating the threat that comes when someone says, I've got some feedback for you. 4.2. So those were really good indicators that we were doing something right in that first year. But those indicators were not sent out to the company. We sent them directly to each manager, and we said, this is a year of learning. If you like your results, keep doing what you're doing. And if you don't, here are some ways in which you can improve your performance. So again, it was all about performance. That was really that was the big way in which we measured this. A little bit different in the stores.
We have another question. Hold on.
Yeah, I just had maybe a cousin question about the compensation side of it from the end of the year, cycle. Do you use a tool would be my first question, and how does the compensation link over to that?
So no surprise that a question about compensation came up. That's where everyone's angst is. That's where all the leaders were concerned. How are you going to allocate reward? How are you going to keep us out of court? How are you going to make sure that people are paid in an unbiased way? And there's some assumptions in that question, and they come from traditional performance management and the trappings of traditional performance management. So what traditional performance management does is it handcuffs managers. It says, we don't trust you to fully assess your employees, so we're going to give you 4 ratings, and you have to pick from those 4, and you can't deviate from those 4. And by the way, we may tell you that your assessment and your rating are wrong and make you change it. And of course, when a manager gets that information and goes back to their employee, they say, HR told me to do it. So we all, we're the victims here. We decided to get out of that business. We wanted to hold the manager fully accountable. In the same way that we expect a manager in our business to be able to determine if this shirt should be reordered. Like, is this one selling? Do you want more of it? Or was it a real dud and you want to mark it down? They can do the same thing for employees. And although I hate to use the term markdown on an employee, the concept is the same. If this shirt sells well, you're going to invest more in it. And if this shirt doesn't sell well, you're going to invest less in it. Same thing with employees. If an employee is performing really well, you're going to give them more bonus. And loosely, more merit. Merit is a little bit more complicated because you also want to look at position and range. If the employee is not performing well, you're going to give them less compensation. We think they can do that. Given a budget and given a few guidelines, they can allocate that budget, that resource, in exactly the same they would for this product. No different. It's traditional performance management that makes us think they can't do it, but they can, and they did. We had usually 40 or 50 calls to our CHRO at the end of the year saying, I hated my review, I hated my money, not the right bonus, don't like my boss. We had 1 call at the end of the first year. And the comp phones, which used to ring off the hook with everybody, I don't know how to do this, how do I do this? It was a non-event, and it's been a non-event since we did it. So it is possible. You still have to differentiate performance, which most people will say, well, isn't that really a rating or a ranking? And I'll say, yeah, it is. We just don't talk about it that way. But you still have to say someone's number 1 and give them the most, and someone's number 10 and give them the least. And everybody in the middle, you might want a peanut butter. You still have to do that. We just don't talk about it that way. The conversation with the employee is, how did you do today compared to how you did yesterday? Are you getting better? Are you learning? That's the conversation with the employee. And if you have those conversations all year long, and you get to the end of the year, there are no surprises in compensation, because the compensation should match all those discussions.
It's really being pushed out from HR to the management. They're running their own little micro businesses.
Yeah, I had to turn my badge in.
Yeah, they don't need you anymore, Rob. Okay, Dave.
Well, good morning, everybody. And our story at Fannie Mae, it's very common, a common narrative, and obviously this is sweeping across the industry. Early last year, I was asked to reimagine performance management. The team responsible for it was merged into my group, so it's sort of a complete fresh start. And for years I used to joke that performance management, I don't know how many people commute via train, but I had a saying that performance management at Fannie Mae, I would think of it like the third rail of the train line. It helps things move along, but you really want to be careful not to touch it or mess with it, or you might get zapped. So that was performance management for years and years. And so all the common feedback, you would hear from leaders, oh, we have to do performance management. That means you got to fill out that form for HR. You just have to get it done. And so when the team came into my group, the first thing I asked them was, what if we imagined that this just didn't exist at all? People didn't do anything related to performance management today whatsoever. And we were external consultants coming by to say, we've got a product and we want to sell it to you. What would that actually look like? How would we actually sell this to the company? How would we make them say, not only do we think we have to do this, we really want to do what you're asking us to do. And so we thought of it from that mindset, from coming from the outside in, starting from scratch, and anything was fair game. So the first thing we did was, well, to do that, we really want to make sure that this is a business-driven process that HR helps facilitate and support, but that they really own it. So the first thing we did was we created a user group of the business with folks all the way up to the senior vice president level to come in and help us look at every single step of the process, down to every individual click we asked people to do in our systems to make sure that it added value. And if we couldn't articulate what value some step added, we took it out and said, let's see what happens. Let's wait for someone to complain and demand it back. So various forms that we used to have. There was one form we had that was somewhat infamous to me. It was 37 clicks to complete on an individual employee. Today, that's 2. We used to ask for 37 points of data. Now it's just provide feedback and kind of an overall summary. We used to dedicate nearly 100,000 employee hours to filling out feedback forms, and we shifted all the energy around that to providing some support and guidance around giving effective feedback and having great conversations, and just like at the Gap, encouraging and then surveying to make sure that people are having those conversations at least every 2 weeks to every month that makes sense in their group, as opposed to laboriously filling out form after form and filing it away. We actually did some analysis on all that data we were collecting in these various feedback forms. We found out our top quartile of folks on a 5-point scale were 4.8 above, and our bottom quartile of folks were 4.6 to 4.5, which means everyone was spending so much time filling out paperwork, they were just literally just clicking through everything and giving everybody 5s and 4s because they were just trying to get it done. They weren't really spending time providing anything that was useful or help people move along. So it's been a really big shift for us, shifting all of our energy to supporting the way people use these things outside of systems and forms, providing more experiences around writing effective goals, around having great feedback conversations, taking all the energy out of filing paperwork and turning it into energy around having great discussions. And what's great is that we're now kind of on generation 2. We sort of stabilized something and made sure that we could articulate that it's fully effective. The user group has actually now persisted, and now we're doing some experiments. So we are experimenting with things like, what if you actually didn't articulate a performance rating to folks? What if it was really just a feedback summary, similar to what you guys are doing? We're also experimenting with things like, what if all goals were transparent? Meaning a team put all of their goals up on a board that everyone in the team could see, and it was revisited at a high level in every team meeting, with this idea that if something goes into the red from a metric perspective, that the team jumps in to help, and it's about focusing on the problem, not the person. So there's no surprises at the end of the year that something went off track. It's more like when something's going off track, it's an opportunity to ask for help earlier on, which builds a better camaraderie with the team. We're also experimenting with getting rid of individual goals in some groups, and actually having all the team members accountable for a set of team goals and team metrics, and we're experimenting with that in a couple of different areas as well. So what we turned from 2 years ago was a business saying, oh yes, tell us what dates all these forms are due. We're going to click through them as quickly as possible. We're going to pay that HR tax and get it done. We shifted it to, we're wiping the slate clean. We're going to design this with you. We won't have a single click, button, form, anything that anyone has to touch or do unless someone from the business can say, this is valuable. And now we've persisted to the world of, how do we actually experiment? How do we make this really innovative and interesting? And some really cool things have started to happen. So for us, our big story has been completely shifting that paradigm of performance management as an HR process to HR is here to support the business on managing performance of employees.
Mm-hmm. What I love about the panel is everyone comes from a different industry, and they're in different stages of what they're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to go back to Tom for a second, and representing the spectrum of you were at Sears, you started to experience the transformation of performance management there, but now you're at Frontier. So tell us about the transition, and what is Frontier expecting from you? Where are you at with any kind of performance management changes there? What are they doing now, and what do you anticipate will be some changes?
I think what I'm expected to bring here to Frontier is the sense of novelty, newness, and how to transition to a process such as that. So on all of our talent management practices, we're at a low level, truthfully, to begin with. And so, but our senior leaders are beginning to understand the value of the strategic value that a human resource practice can bring. And they're starting to ask the types of questions that other panelists talked about as they got these things started. So I have a framework from which to build upon, so my goal will be to build that. Just one other word about the datafication, too. So I know there's different perspectives on here. At Sears, one thing that we found that actually added new value was the datafication of this new performance enablement process. So it was all an application-based system, so people would click in, click this, click that for completing their goals or objectives and the feedback and that sort of thing. So we had a lot of data, and people had their own individual dashboards. And when we had our quarterly check-ins, it was the associate who led that conversation and not the leader. It was the associate who rated themselves on the extent to which they completed those objectives and key results. It was not the leader. Oftentimes, the leader would have to sort of inch them up and say, you underrated yourself with respect to this particular goal, because they would do that. When we look back to our conversation earlier in the week when Kevin talked about the work of Daniel Pink, when you think about what drives human motivation beyond the basic tasks that people have to get done, that higher order motivation, he talks about three things. He talks about autonomy, he talks about mastery, and purpose. So when you think about it, what we found is strong tie. What drives autonomy is the fact that I have the ability to set my own goals. I determine what they are. My leader will help me, but when it comes to autonomy, the degree to which I feel that I have control of my work, I get to drive that, I'm empowered to do that, the more that people are going to feel like they're contributing to something better. On the mastery piece, the feedback that people got was really important. They could say, what type of feedback am I getting? Am I getting feedback from others based upon my results, based upon my demonstration of our cultural beliefs, or based upon my demonstration of our leadership capabilities? And one other point to this story is the fact that when we talked about leadership capabilities, our definition of Sears is leadership capabilities are not the purview of a person who has the title of leader. Everybody has the opportunity to demonstrate leadership in an organization. If you're an individual contributor, if you're influencing in some particular way, that's leadership. So we help perpetuate that. And then results, and what type of results that I'm getting for. So everything was tracked. We had that data. We learned that the democratization of data, the sharing of the data, also led to new insights, new ownership and accountability for this new process, versus the leaders having to sort of drive it and drive it and drive it. People began to ask questions. Maybe I need to source feedback from different people that I've traditionally been sourcing. I've not done this before. Maybe I should look at some other cultural beliefs that I need to work on, or some other capabilities. So there's lots of additional work that we did around the datafication piece that we actually found actually adds a lot of value to the process. And people checked off. So when the associate had their quarterly check-in, they go back into the system, they checked off that they had that, and that was it. That was the only acknowledgement that there was ever a conversation, just the associates checking off in that system. And we shared that data, and we encouraged organizations to monitor that data. And we published that data, too, to say, here are the business units and stuff that they're doing really well on these types of things. Just the fact that we posted that data out there actually caused movement to happen because people wanted to inch up, you know, in terms of their participation in this process.
Excellent. I'm going to stay with you for just a second because if I were in the audience right now, what I would want to know is, I know my company desperately needs to change. What's the mindset that I need to look for in my C-suite partners to at least get an inkling that I should stick my toe in the water? Or how should I be, preparing the road, so to speak, to get them ready for the possibility of entertaining this? So you're working with two different sets of C-suite partners now, from before and now. What advice would you give on that?
Well, I think you start with a comparison of, how's it going today? Your current system, how's that working for you? Not so good. What would you like it to be? All right, so if you live in the world of what can be, if you always get what if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. So it's a choice point for an organization, right? It's an accountability choice point. Do you want to continue to get the current level that you're at, or do you want to work in the world of what can be, what could be possible, based upon the fact that people taking a higher degree of accountability for their work, sourcing feedback, all those types of things to unlock and drive value for the business. That's what the intention of this process was. And there's not a leader who didn't say, well, we don't want people to take greater ownership of the business. There's no leader that said we don't want a better set of results than what we're getting. And so from those, those before and after comparisons and getting people to vision. And once people begin to see that the world ahead is good, as long as they can more easily move into a future of our choosing if we can carry forth parts of our past. And if we're going to carry forth parts of our past, we should carry forth the absolute best parts of our past. And so we allowed people to hang on to that, but also to sort of think in the future.
So I'm hearing vision, giving them a way forward they can actually see it, and then also giving them all the reasons why that really aligns with what matters most to them. The what's in it for me, almost.
Yeah, and we had just an amazing CHRO who was a visionary as well. And that person had a lot of influence upward in the organization. So, and he took that role very seriously. He was a champion for what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Same question.
Well, so I had the luxury of having a CEO who wanted to make performance management simpler. And having him say that was a big door opener. He pulled his C-suite together 4 times in the year that we were designing this to talk about different elements, mostly about reward, because that's where everybody gets concerned. We did 2 things that I think helped to convince the C-suite that the path we were taking was the right one to take. The first thing was we sat and we interviewed all 13 of them. And we didn't ask them if they liked performance management. I don't care what they think about performance management. They've only known traditional performance management, and some of them believe that it actually drives performance, and I know that it doesn't. So asking them that question was not going to help our case. Instead, we asked them where in the business they weren't seeing the behaviors that they wanted to see in order to drive performance and to win in the marketplace. And when we asked them those questions and we read through those answers, there were some very specific themes that rose to the top that helped create sort of the guiding principles for our work. One of them was to hold managers fully accountable for hiring, assessing, rewarding, and developing their teams. They really wanted managers to be held accountable. That was one of the 5. One of them was simple. One of them was to create a closer tie between rewards and business performance. So there were some really clear marching orders in there that we were able to follow, and that's what we got from the C-suite. But at the same time, I spent 4 months doing research about what actually drives performance, what all the new technology out there was telling us. And it was really clear that that was not what traditional performance management was all about. I read Daniel Pink's book and understood what drives and motivates knowledge workers as opposed to task workers. I read Carol Dweck's book about the mindset of those who outperform others. I read David Rock's book, for those of you who know Dr. Rock and his Neuroleadership Institute, about how the brain responds to social interaction and what that response does when someone says, I've got some feedback for you. Right? It's a threat response that makes you want to run away. And I also, for those of you who are tasked with making this change, read Samuel Colbert's book, Get Rid of the Performance Appraisal. It's a 250-page rant about everything that's wrong with performance management, and it gives you the language to sit down with your C-suite and say, this is why we need to get rid of what we have and do something different. So those 2 things combined, asking them what would drive performance and then coming back to them with the science of what actually drives performance and then explaining how that turned into the program that we created, made it very easy for them to accept it. But remember, I had a CEO who was already aligned. I think it's much harder when you're coming to your C-suite and saying, we got something wrong here that we need to fix. That's a much steeper hill to go up.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, from what you're sharing, it's like doing a lot of homework. It is really exploring the things that bother them so that you can align any kind of discussion about it related to things that are already on the same level, or you're entering their conversation in their mind already. It's kind of like marketing in a way. Yeah, excellent. Same question for David?
Great. Well, I think for us, we are in a mode of transformation across all that we do in the company. So when I think of what's influencing and driving everything that's happening at Fannie Mae right now, financial services, I mean, actually, if you go broader than the mortgage industry, financial services as an industry is an area where there's huge disruption afoot and huge disruption to come. When you think of even just things that have happened over the last 20 to 30 years, how often do you go into a bank today versus when you used to go into it before? You know, how many people, you know, all of your financial history and transactions sits on your phone, whereas how different did that used to feel? How much, you know, change is sweeping through financial services? Kind of the last place to get to is mortgages. How fun is it to get a mortgage? Right? Show of hands before. Oh, no one? Okay, right. Because it's not fun. Anything that is highly paper-driven, something that you're asked to submit something and then you're asked to submit it again in a slightly different way and you can't figure out and you get a big stack of paper to sign and you're going through it and you're like, well, this is wrong. And they say, well, actually, it doesn't matter. Just sign it anyway, is something that is ripe for disruption. And the disruption that is coming in financial services, when you talk about AI, when you talk about blockchain, is bigger than what has already happened. You know, how we think of currency is going to change over the next several decades. So we as a company are going through a big transformation as we prepare for what's the future of financial services, what's the future of mortgages, what's the future of the secondary mortgage market that we're in, and we know that we have to change. We have to get ready for a future that is a lot more about innovation and is a lot more about competitiveness. And so when we get all the way down to performance management, we are swept up in a big sea of change that's happening across the company. So folks are excited about doing things differently. They're also very interested in how is what we're doing with the various things we do in HR influencing our human capital to be readying us for the workforce we need to compete in a future that's not quite here yet. Because if we're not ahead of that future, particularly when it comes to finance and technology, you're either ahead or you are way, way behind. So for us, this idea of doing things differently in a way that's more impactful to get the workforce ready to identify what their needs are, to perform better, to develop better, is really core to our strategy as a company right now and what we're trying to do to get ready for the future of our own industry.
So a lot of it is the external forces have played into making it possible to experiment because you know it's do or die kind of thing.
It is a active conversation that we are probably in the last few years of what we almost consider like an incubator, right? Where we are somewhat protected from these external forces that are working their way through banking and finance that are going to get to the mortgage industry very, very soon, and it will look very, very differently. And the process that my kids will go through to get a mortgage someday will be unrecognizable to what exists today. And so how will our company be positioned not just to be successful, but to continue to be a leader in that and perhaps even bring about that transformation? You can't do that without the workforce that's kind of primed and eager and all along the way down to an individual employee getting the right feedback that's, letting them know that, competition and innovation and, leading and developing others are all core to what makes us a great company.
Little encumbrances as possible.
There is a direct connection between our strategy, our corporate values that underpin our performance management process.
Excellent.
And it's all geared towards what company we need to be in the next 20 to 30 years.
Excellent. I just wanted to open up for questions. I've got more, but I certainly want to draw from the group now as we come to a close. Yes.
Hi, so Rob, you mentioned it a little bit. Thank you. Trying to project here. Did any of you experience kind of resistance or pushback for using, or I'm trying to articulate, it's more about regulation and using performance management as a tool to document for other purposes as opposed to just performance management. So I come from financial services as well, and there's a lot of regulation globally as well as domestically, and I get a lot of pushback to, like, we have to use that process to do other stuff because we have to evidence it for audits or compliance or what other reasons. So it's not really even about performance management. It's just like, well, that one we have the paper trail on. So we have to use it for that purpose, so it becomes a proxy for other things as opposed to trying to separate out, So I was just curious if any of you went through that same kind of trial and error. How do we really separate it out so it doesn't get used for other things? Does that make sense, first of all?
Yeah, so
Has that kicked in yet?
I'll speak only briefly because I'm not in a regulated industry. I'm sure people who work with the government all the time have a lot more things that they need to abide by in order to have their performance management processes work. We didn't have that. But what I will tell you is that that rating drives so many things, even in a company that doesn't have regulations. And all my HR partners were saying, well, what are we going to do now that we don't have that rating? How are we going to identify our high performers? So there is a real close integration between performance management and talent planning. Talent planning, to me, is the place where you identify your high performers. But the data that's brought into those discussions has to come from a manager's discussion of performance with their direct report. It used to be brought in by the rating. Now it's brought in by the human. The manager actually has to be knowledgeable enough to have that conversation with his or her peers in a discussion and place their talent in we use a 4-square, not a 9-box. Again, we simplified talent planning as well. But be able to use the data that they've collected in that relationship to talk across their peers about their talent. But that's about as far as I'll go around anything, about the interconnection between the rating and other things. Do either of you have?
Yeah. David.
I would just add, we're highly regulated. There are a few things we have to collect. But when we took that approach of literally going click by click, that's why 40 things you have to click on and fill out is now 2. Because when there was something that we had to do, we said, okay, this we could at least articulate the reason why, and it was very clear that if something existed, there was a purpose for it. But what we found was that, 2 out of 40 things, that's 5%, that really needed to be there. And the other 95% really didn't add any value. So there were a few things. We kept those things, but at least when we went through that examination process, we identified what things were true and what things were myths about what actually needed to be collected.
Good question.
We have another question.
My question is kind of twofold. So one, when you were making these changes, do you feel that you have to have a culture that's kind of ready for that change? And then can you talk a little bit about the change management process that you went through to prepare the organization?
I can start, yeah. So first, from a communication perspective of telling the transformation story, it actually started a few years ago when a small group of us were enlisted in the task of creating a new vision for the company and creating an underpinning set of corporate values. And that can sound like you're preparing to, print a really nice banner and post it up somewhere so everyone can look at it and then immediately forget it about a week later. But we took it very seriously, and it's had actually a pretty significant impact in that we then sort of swept through all of our internal communications, all of our talent, performance, basically every system we had, and we swept away things that did not align to those values, and we kind of repositioned everything around those values. We actually also created a really neat internal peer-to-peer rewards program where you can actually, if you identify a peer who's demonstrating the values in some way, you can actually go through an internal system we created and give them a set of points. And you note which value that they demonstrated, and it goes through a company newsfeed that everyone can see. So-and-so did a great job on this demonstrating the, we lead the market value for Fannie Mae. And there are, very few approvals involved with that. At actually the simplest award level, there's no approvals. Any employee is empowered to identify any other employee and give them a points reward, which can be immediately kind of cashed in as a gift certificate or like a digital gift card or something like that. So it started with telling the story of the vision and the values and what they meant, and our CEO really championed that. So I think from beginning the change management journey, it started in the right place of we created a North Star. At Fannie Mae, we say we want to be America's most valued housing partner. Each word was chosen very deliberately. And that was a long-term permanent aspiration, and the values that fit underneath that are supporting of it. Along the way, we've created an ongoing story and discussion with employees of how we're demonstrating each value. So how we're innovating, how we're getting better customer service. Each value has kind of a set of stories that's been told and a set of goals that's been articulated for leadership to demonstrate it. So it started with painting a North Star, telling a story of what that vision looks like, and then making sure that everything was aligned and reinforced underneath it as we've gone over the last few years.
It's kind of cultural preparation for
Yeah.
for the big wave that's coming.
And letting every employee know, I think it's very simple things like every employee's performance form has the same 6 values, whether you're the CFO or whether you're a campus associate. You've got the same 6 values you need to demonstrate as appropriate at your level. And you can say that it's a consistent journey that we're all on. And we all are empowered to recognize one another for living up to that. So no one should feel like this is the C-suite campaign. No one should feel like this is that cool, flashy object that's here for a minute. It's something that is really about what is the future of the company, and everyone has actually already been given a role to help bring it about.
Excellent. Well, we're now at the end of our panel discussion, which we want to talk more, but at least we planted the seed here, and certainly we can have off discussions, but we want to really give a round of applause to our panelists for sharing what they did.